Former MP Joy Smith is a force to be reckoned with. She fought to raise awareness of human trafficking in Canada. She has worked to bring into effect new laws, which are now embedded in the Criminal Code of Canada to deal with it. She now works full-time for the Joy Smith Foundation, continuing to fight the exploitation of men, women, and children in this nation. Joy Smith, I am so honored to get to interview you. You are one of my heroes. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, we hear about trafficking overseas, but a lot of people would be surprised to find out it happens right here. Tell me about the reality of human trafficking right down the street.
93% of the trafficked survivors and victims in Canada, 93% are Canadian born. And a kilometer blocks from where we're sitting right now, there's trafficked victims. It is very prevalent. Perpetrators make between $240,000, $260,000 per victim per year. That's why they do it. It's tax-free. They don't claim it. I have to tell you.
File a tax return. I'm a trafficker.
That's right. And they themselves keep their families very well fed. They go to beach holidays, and their kids go to private schools. There's lots they live a good life. But unfortunately, the underage kids that are lured by traffickers into the sex trade causes them to suffer issues of mistrust of everybody that's close to them. They suffer issues of abuse, beatings, addictions, all sorts of things like that. So they ruin young lives, and it happens every day in Canada.
And it's all for money too. You know, you think about drugs, you can only sell them once, but a human, at least for a space of time until you literally ruin them, you can sell them again and again and again.
Exactly, yeah. In fact, one trafficker I talked to about 3 weeks ago, he said that his mentor, who was another trafficker, drove him past schoolyards and said, "Look at these kids, they're ATMs." So that's exactly how they look at them.
You did something very unusual. You became aware of this issue because your son was a policeman. He was working against exploitation. You saw the toll on him. You got passionate about the topic, and you eventually ended up in Parliament fighting to change our laws. Tell me about that fight, because it was epic, wasn't it?
It was a difficult fight, and I learned something through that too, though, because when I went to Parliament, I couldn't figure out why nobody knew about human trafficking in Canada. I'd been rescuing survivors for 10 years before I went to Parliament, as well as teaching, because I was a teacher at that time. But when I went to Parliament, no one knew about it. It was kind of the joke, you know, there's no human trafficking. And I remember being so bitter until the day I got a motion passed and to study human trafficking. And I was able to bring in those same survivors and victims who told their story. And the people that were laughing at me and all the rest of it had tears in their eyes. So God was teaching me a lesson there too. They just didn't know. And
you think about the average Canadian not knowing, okay, you know, like some of us were in a bubble. We don't necessarily interact with that part of humanity, so we're unaware. But when you think our lawmakers had no idea, that's shocking to me.
Because lawmakers are citizens just like you and I, and what they do is, you know, they run for office, and it depends what their background is. I didn't know until my son was profoundly affected by, when he was in the ICE unit, about the brutality to these young kids. And when he left ICE, he felt so guilty about leaving those files behind of kids he didn't find. And in those days, they had to actually watch these images and hear their cries, because a lot of the traffickers, you know, to sell their victims will video it and things like that. So it was very bad to watch. But now it's a little different today, because people are aware of human trafficking, and ICE units, they have other materials. They don't have to actually always watch all these images and all these things. They have other ways of doing it as well. And people are becoming more aware that human trafficking happens in Canada. So
you were able to make some significant changes to the criminal code in Canada. Just quickly, can you just give me a summary of what you were able to accomplish in your time in Parliament?
Well, mandatory minimums for traffickers of children 18 years and under, and now they get jail time for abusing children like that. And secondly, reaching the long arm of the Canadian law into other countries when Canadian citizens or permanent residents of Canada go abroad and they traffic victims abroad, in usually countries that don't have strong judicial systems or strong police forces. Now we can bring them back to Canada to try them here. And of course the National Action Plan, the one that was in place prior to March last year, was an action plan that I wrote, and then our government actually at that time adopted it, made some changes to it, and it was announced during the election. But what happened was that was rehabilitation for the survivors. That was money for re-education and stuff like that. So now we need to get a new national action plan in because the need is still out there, but the greater need is preventing it.
You've done incredible work. You are doing incredible work. We're going to find out a little more about that and a little bit more about how a Manitoba girl went from small town to parliamentarian to now fighting it on the front lines. That's just in a moment.